Hi, welcome. We'll get started in just a minute. I think this is a really, really important topic, especially as a voice teacher or anyone who sings more regularly, even for beginners, of course. But vocal health is everything. A lot of our practice is designed around trying to maintain appropriate vocal health. So, yeah, and hopefully, again, respond with any questions or comments you might have. I think this one in particular, right, there might be a lot of questions or particular concerns, and hopefully we can address some of those things. Of course, as we'll talk about it, there's sort of like a line of things that you want to think about in terms of your health. There's things you can do yourself, but ultimately, at a certain point, you'll want to consult a healthcare professional, and we'll talk about some specific things you can do with that, especially if you're a professional and you're struggling with this and it's a recurrent issue. But first and foremost, we'll talk about the practice and how we can maintain appropriate vocal health, and then we'll talk about what happens when things go wrong and what can you do about it, which is it can be a really scary thing, especially if you're a professional singer and you're back-to-back performances and you have high demand. That's usually when a lot of these issues occur. So we'll talk about all of that. So yeah, definitely. So I think kind of the one of the most important things to address is as a vocalist, we're primarily athletes and athletes of small muscles. And there's lots of singing teachers and vocal health professionals who discuss this. So it will ultimately play a role in everything we discuss is how do we treat our voice like being a professional athlete? And I think that'll demystify some of the things and talk about some of the sort of cultural issues we have with the pressure we put on vocal athletes. Um, yes. We'll talk about all of these kinds of things. What does it mean to have a tired voice? When is it of particular concern? And the timing of all of this kind of stuff can matter. Again, I'm not a healthcare professional, so we'll talk about when you want to start to consult somebody and some good resources on all of that as well. So, I like to first talk about this concept, which is a great framework to work with. In general, it's always kind of parceling out what's happening with the voice, what can I change in my practice and my process in order to maintain better vocal health. I call this the triangle of vocal fatigue, and it's sort of three different concepts. The first one is misuse, then we have overuse, and we have abuse. And all of these things kind of work together to create vocal fatigue. And some things can be worse than others, and it's important to address what's happening with your voice. So misuse is probably the most important one to discuss because especially as a voice teacher, that's what we're working on is developing efficiency with our voice so that we can use it for longer. And so you'll start to see this plays a role with overuse as well. Um, so in general, the first thing I want to talk about is we carry a lot of tension with us from day to day based on what we're doing. And this is why I always put in a plug for actually stretching and having a stretch routine, be it a yoga class or some self-care tools that you might have. You can do all the vocal exercises in the world, but if you've got really tight shoulders and a really tight neck and jaw, it's going to be really hard to work with your voice. And so we're going to go over some practical things. I know this can a class like this can start to be a lot of talking, but I'm always big about, hi, Alex. I'm always big about practical solutions and things you can do to regularly maintain appropriate vocal health. So this is kind of one of the things I do with my students is like a very cursory thing is always to make sure that you're checking in with your body. Can you turn your neck from side to side? It seems simple, but we always want to do some of this stuff before we sing, working with your lower back, opening this up. If we don't have our lower back open, it's hard to get appropriate deep breaths. And so that's going to play a big role also in vocal health. So obviously that's very cursory, but I recommend doing more of this, before you show up for a rehearsal, before you show up for a class, and definitely before performances and afterwards. Like really actually give yourself some time to decompress. And then we're going to talk about some sort of ways that we can do some self-laryngeal massage. And of course, we're going to be very delicate about this. So one of the big tension spots that we can have is right behind our ear here with our jaw, and right here as well. And so When we're stressed, this kind of plays a role in what I talked about last week. When we're stressed, our muscles can kind of lock up and move this way, and that can get in the way of how our vocal folds are working, and it can start to squeeze them, and this can cause a lot of vocal tension, which can lead to damage eventually. So one thing that you can do that I like to teach is called the sternocleidomastoid stretch. And this one I'm going to break down a little more today. So the idea is you take your arm and you put it behind your back, and we're trying to get a little bit of a counterweight here so our shoulders can pull down. Now, this gets a little weird on a camera, but I still want to show you because I think it's so helpful, especially if you're experiencing a lot of tension back here. So the idea here is I'm going to put my head to the side and angle it up a little bit, like I'm looking up over my shoulder. And then what's weird about this stretch is you have to relax your jaw and almost kind of yawn. And that's going to start to create this stretch right here. And you can kind of pull a little bit with your shoulder. And then you can swivel your head around and you're going to start to feel it kind of pull through your face a little bit. It's a great routine to have if you're just starting, getting ready to sing, and especially if you're doing back-to-back performances and such. So it'll look really weird, but try it with me and see what it feels like. And you have to activate it again by relaxing your jaw and letting it hang a little bit. And I'll show you what it looks like. So I go up and over. I breathe in really deeply, and I pull, and then I just kind of swivel right here a little bit. Now, if you don't have tension here, you may not feel very much, but if you do, you're going to feel that really start to pull. And then, of course, you can do the other side. You're up and over, a little bit over the shoulder. Relax the jaw, and you feel that pull right here, back behind your neck. Um, yeah. Oh, very good. I'm just reading about some of this that you're saying here. Yeah, yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about, external conditions, fires, allergies, acid reflux. These are all things that can influence the voice. So we'll discuss some of that as well too. Yeah, definitely being, working with opening up your sinuses, using a neti pot, all of these things can be really, really helpful as well. So that's a stretch again, is the sternocleidomastoid stretch. We can kind of go up and over and relax like that, relax our jaw and get a little space here. Because again, when we're really stressed out and we're singing with a lot of strain, we start to squeeze around our throat a little bit. And this is what's going to cause potentially more damage a lot of the time. So that's one thing. The other thing is crossing your hands like this, putting it behind your head and massaging this area back here and then all the way down the throat. And then you can let go of your hands and you can squeeze and rub these areas, squeeze the shoulder. And then here's going to be some of the most interesting stuff. So this can scare a lot of people. You have to be very delicate with yourself, really pay attention to what it feels like. But ultimately, our throat is designed to be flexible. And so you can't do this while you're singing or talking. But I'm going to show you how you can gently also massage and feel out your larynx a little bit. So here's the idea. Watch this. I can actually move it from side to side, very gently, of course, and just notice with the mobility. Is it really tight? Is it really rigid? Don't wrench at it, right? See if you feel a little sort of gentle, sort of, there might be some little, it's like a crunchy sort of feeling or sensation, and that's totally normal. Again, don't wrench at it, but I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So I relax my throat. I can move it around and I can gently massage these muscles actually. And this is great if you're a regular singer. I recommend doing some of this, especially if you're feeling a lot of tension here. So you can gently massage that. We also have our cough reflex, which can happen down here. Be very delicate about it. But if you have excessive coughing as one of your things with vocal health, that can really, really irritate your voice, right? Your cords are slapping together when you're coughing. And you can actually gently sort of massage this area because it can get very easily triggered. So be very, very delicate. And then we've got this hyoid bone up here. That's a free floating bone and it can move from side to side. Sometimes our larynx and the hyoid bone can get kind of fused together and a little tight. Yeah, you can do all of these kinds of things. Yeah, exactly. And there's lots of little acupressure points and ways that we can relax our body. This is a really, really great segue from what we did last week, which is about how do we hack our nervous system, get into a calm space so that our muscles are less likely to clench up and tighten and squeeze around our throat. So I recommend, do some of this gentle massage work, laryngeal massage. You can look this up online. Self-laryngeal massage is a big thing. Um, massaging back behind your jaw. Of course, people have TMJ issues and all of these things. You want to try and relax before you start singing. So that's the stretch side of things. And this is my regular routine. I always first pay attention to my body. What does it feel like? Do I have tension from the day? And can I work that out a little bit before I start singing? The next thing is how we support our sound. And I know this is going to be redundant for some of you who follow this a lot, but it's so, so essential. A lot of our vocal issues. Hi, how's it going? A lot of our issues come from not supporting appropriately in our belly and our back, our lower body. And if you support and squeeze from here, you're more likely to impinge upon the vocal folds, which are flapping together to create our pitches. When we start to do that, we can create excessive pressure, and that can lead to a lot of vocal fatigue. We'll talk about this as well, but a little later. But yeah, that's sort of a general plug for we support from our lower belly and our back. Now, the voice is a pressure system. So if we're not supporting from here, what I always try to explain to my students and almost right away in a lesson is our muscles here try to compensate by squeezing and making the space smaller. And it's the body trying to help with support to support the airflow. But ultimately, that's going to cause a lot of tension because when these muscles squeeze, they can only squeeze, by the way, they can only contract inward. So we keep them relaxed or they're engaging. When these muscles squeeze, they get in the way of our vocal folds, which are trying to oscillate a particular way. When they're getting too rigid, we end up pushing harder, and then we can experience some fatigue. So that's kind of like the misuse thing in a nutshell. There's so much to that, but obviously a lot of this goes into our practice of support and how we actually work all of that. So I'm only just doing a little cursory example of that. But if that's you and you're trying to squeeze from your throat, you're going to want to look at some support exercises and try to engage your belly and your back. This is why I do this right away, right after stretching. I try to get my support activated by doing a hissing or a breath exercise, right? So I'll go like, now some people get the wrong idea and they actually are trying to push from here, like going like, and push, right? That's not what we're doing here. We want the face and the neck and head to be really, really relaxed and just control it from our belly. So we're spiking the pressure and we're going that kind of stuff. So making sure that we have sensation and support down here. Now, I'm going to talk about a lot of other things. So I just wanted to plug for that. That's our appropriate vocal technique. When you have better vocal technique, you ultimately can sing for longer without fatiguing your voice. Gargling is not a bad thing, by the way. Some people do that actually to help reduce some inflammation. So gargling with salt water also helps to kind of clear the throat, disinfect a little bit. All of those things are totally fine. Not bad for you at all. So here's another, just one more thing before we go on. So misuse. The other thing is how we make our sound loud. This is a really important concept. So this is where a lot of misuse can come into play. So if you think about sound in general, there's a couple ways that we can make something louder. We can think about surface area. So if I do this, barely hear it, but do that very gently, you can definitely still hear it because there's more surface area and contact. That's difficult with the voice. If you think of the vocal folds, in order to sing into higher registers, if we try to keep our vocal folds thick, ultimately that's going to keep us stuck in chest voice. This is a little technical, but I just kind of want to point it out that we're not trying to put our chords together harder to sing higher. The other thing is force. So that's this other concept, right? Obviously, the harder I hit my hands, the louder they're going to be. These things fatigue the voice and they fatigue the vocal folds, which is just a tiny small piece of tissue, right? For women, it's often like the size of a quarter, or a size of a dime. And then for men, it can be like the size of a quarter sometimes, but it's really, really small. And so force and surface area are not great for how the voice works. So we need to primarily think about resonance. And resonance is a great way to get your voice to amplify without actually putting strain on the tissue of your vocal folds. So that's a big plug for singing with resonance and using support, two of the main key principles of proper vocal technique. So if you're using your voice more appropriately, you're going to be able to sing for longer. And then there's this other thing again. I'm going to mention it several times during this class, which is that singers are athletes. We're athletes of small muscles. And so your practice should be about gently conditioning your voice, just like you're, trying to get ready for a certain sport. You want to engage your muscles just to the point where they get a little fatigued, let them rest, stretch, and then engage them again. And that's the process of conditioning, right? To get stronger. If you rush that process, you're more likely to hurt yourself. So you can see why the framework of thinking about being an athlete is really, really helpful for singers. It is essentially the same thing. So we condition our voice slowly over time. That's why we do the practice the way we do. That's why it's good to start slow when you're first starting out to make sure you're getting the right coordination. And over time, your voice is going to get more resilient. In fact, there's all sorts of really cool science articles about how when you sing for longer and you're conditioned appropriately, your vocal folds get more elastic. There are more fibers that kind of stretch through and they become more resilient. But you have to condition them over time. So, consistency of practice. We don't want to rush this process. If you rush the process, you're more likely to hurt yourself. So, that's a little bit of that concept. The next thing is overuse. And this one, it happens very often, especially as you rise in the ladder of, skill and performance, and you have more demand and more people want to hear you do your stuff. There's a limit to how long we can sing. When we're singing, it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. But when you think about like frequency or hertz, like 440 hertz, uh, the chords are coming together that many times per second, hundreds of times per second, and that can cause a lot of fatigue. Actually, it's think about the speed of them hitting so many times in the course of a concert. That's actually can really fatigue that tissue. So there's a limit to how long we can sing. Of course, the more you practice and the more you condition your voice, the longer you can go. But we just have to take that into account, right? Some of these professional artists, we want them to sing and perform all the time. And I just want to put a plug for this, if you're thinking about like an athlete on a sports field, uh, injuries happen, especially when people are trying to do extra special stuff and they're really pushing themselves and doing extra tricks and things like that, tours back to back. These kinds of things can, it's possible that you're going to have sometimes a mistake and some injury that occurs. And we're going to talk about that kind of injury in a second. But I just want people as general fans and beginning singers to like understand and appreciate that. We want artists to value their health over trying to continue to have output. And sometimes it can really, really affect a career, right? When the damage happens, it takes a lot longer to recover from. And think again, like, you have someone on a sports field gets injured, they sit out and they go through recovery and physical training, and that's a little more of an understood practice. But with sometimes with performers and singers, we have a little less empathy for that, and I just hope that understanding this will get people to have a little more of that. It sucks when someone has to stop a concert mid-concert, but sometimes people injure themselves, and pushing past that when you're starting to feel pain in your voice, that's the abuse part of it. And so I think we all need to have a little more patience for that, especially if we want our favorite artists to keep doing what they're doing. So I think that's a really, really important thing. And as a plug again, that we're athletes, we're doing tricks, and sometimes we can hurt ourselves, and we have to stop right when we hurt ourselves. Otherwise, you're going into the realm of abuse, singing on a really swollen voice. And that's when the more permanent, lasting damage happens. So again, we need to rest and we need to stretch our voice. The reason why I do a lot of this right after, stretch, breathe, and I do this stuff where I do like a hum and I go like, yeah, yeah. I'm doing this in a low part of my range is to check in and see how does it feel? And if I've been doing a lot of conditioning, I've got to do some vocal stretching to make sure there's mobility and that I've got resonance in my sound. All of these things are great ways to check in with your voice. If it's if you can't maintain a sound down in a really low register, basic low register, it's feeling really pushed and the muscles are really engaging, sit with it, try to do it very, very gently and see if you can get it to slightly open up. Um, but ultimately, like this is our practice, right? If you're doing a lot of conditioning, you're going to have to do some stretching with your voice and slow down, work some stuff in the lower range, try to see if you can get the muscles to disengage and decompress a little bit. This is for our general practice. Of course, if you're starting to feel a lot of pain, we're going to talk about that in a second. The other side of abuse is, take care of yourself, staying up late at night, talking really loud, shouting, screaming, alcohol, some of these things, they can really fatigue the voice. And so dehydrate and we're more likely to cause injury when we do these things late at night, particularly. Again, these are the things that we want to make sure, if you have a concert and you're not taking care of yourself, you're more likely to injure yourself. Again, just like an athlete, right? We have to prepare ourselves and make sure that everything, our body is healthy before we start doing something really physically engaging. So that's the abuse side of things. Again, misuse, overuse, and abuse, they kind of all factor into each other, right? If you are overusing your voice, you're more likely to misuse it because you're going to get fatigued. The vocal folds are going to start to get a little bruised and hemorrhaged. We'll talk about that. And then, yeah, this sort of cycle can happen, right? If you're misusing your voice, you can't use it for as long. And so it's this sort of pendulum swing. If you're abusing your voice, you're more likely to misuse it, and you're not going to be able to use it for as long as well. So it's just a framework to think about. The other thing to mention is habits in your speaking voice can play a huge role with your singing voice as well. So if you're raising your voice a lot as a teacher, trying to get people's attention, just lots of excessive talking, talking with too much vocal fry. Vocal fry is a great stylistic thing. It also can actually be a great way to massage your vocal folds and that decompression thing. Sometimes I'll do that circle of vowels thing, but with vocal fry like this. Yeah, yeah. It sounds really weird, but ultimately that's actually kind of massaging the vocal folds a little bit. But if we talk with vocal fry all the time, vocal fry is just a really, really relaxed support register. And so essentially what happens is it's kind of like lazy speech. If you're speaking with a lot of vocal fry, you tend to lose connection to your support in your belly and your back. And so there's sort of this kind of dichotomy that happens. We get like a really relaxed fry voice, and then you go to raise your voice and it can get really shouty, and then back to that really fry thing. And that's because we've disconnected from our support. So we're more likely to squeeze when we're trying to engage and call across the room or something like that. So if you talk with a lot of vocal fry, that might be something to consider, is doing some more support exercises, trying to actually have more clarity in your speech. And that's actually going to also help to maintain regular vocal health because you're keeping your general voice stronger and more active. And that's obviously going to contribute into your singing voice. So that's some of these ideas. Again, yeah, in general, just trying to talk using more of your belly and your back is going to help with your speech. Sometimes we're just talking too much, right? And so finding some times to take a break and rest your voice can be really helpful, especially as a singer as well. So that's just something to pay attention to, right? A lot of times we're thinking about like, what can I do with like voice actual exercises? And sometimes, we're doing voice exercises for like, an hour or so every once in a while, and you're talking for tons of hours, and so that's actually going to play a bigger role. So just an awareness thing throughout the day can be really, really helpful. So let's start to talk about the other side, like what happens when the voice is injured, is hoarse, damaged. And I want to put out, there's a really great resource that you all can follow. It's called the Center for Vocal Health. There's a website, and the laryngologist who runs the center is Dr. Reena Gupta. and she has some really great resources on vocal health. There's a whole little blog thing, some case studies, and you, of course, can do consultations. And if you're a regular performing artist, vocalist, you can do checkups and you can actually get evaluations just as a regular health thing because it's your industry. And having to stop singing for a long time can be really scary. And if you're making your income off of that, it can be really really scary. So, anyways, it's great to have those regular evaluations to get a sense of how things are going. Um, Here's a plug. So if you're experiencing lots of vocal pain and potentially voice loss, these kinds of things, um, an ENT, a lot of people say like go see an ENT and get a laryngoscope. An ENT is a great option, but they're more of a general healthcare practitioner. So it's more of like ear, nose, and throat doctor, right? So they're covering all of these things, whereas a laryngologist is a subspecialist. And sometimes if you're having really severe issues and you want some immediate help and solutions and consultation, trying to find a laryngologist like someone like Dr. Reena Gupta and again the Center for Vocal Health can get you right to the thing because they're focusing specifically on vocal health and the larynx. So it's an extra fellowship. It's a little bit of extra training, and usually a laryngologist, I'm pretty sure, is also a surgeon. So that sometimes we talk about vocal surgeries, and we'll get to that in a second as well. So what happens when the voice is fatigued? The vocal folds are really small, as we talked about, and so the idea is they're flapping together hundreds of times per second. And if we start to try and squeeze with these muscles, we tend to put extra pressure on them. And over time, even it doesn't matter who you are, over time, uh, your your voice is going to start to hemorrhage or bruise a little bit. And there's a range of this. So if have gotten a hoarse voice before, it sounds a little raspy and stuff. There's often probably a little bit of bruising going on. Now we can recover from that when we have really severe bruising and lots of bruising. Hold on, I'm gonna remove these. Okay. Yes. And then I'm gonna report that. Okay. Great. Now, so if you're having lots of bruising or the cords are coming together really intensely, this is going to, and you're doing this consistently over time, you start to get calluses or actual little polyps and things that can develop on the surface of the vocal folds. And then what happens is that makes you work harder to try and get your cords to come together. And it can become this vicious cycle. So that's, if your voice is getting hoarse, that's a sign that you're getting to a place of vocal fatigue. If you've got some raspiness after singing and from lots of talking, that's a sign that there's some vocal fatigue. Now, if you have immediate vocal loss, that's, especially after like a performance and you're a professional singer, that's something that you're going to want to check out like within 1 to 2 days. Like I'm really serious. Like, this is different from like you've been staying up late at night and then you wake up and your voice is groggy and it doesn't really come together for a second. This is something where you have a little more of a prolonged sensation and there's lots of pain. That's something you want to check out. And vocal rest is actually not that helpful in that situation. So that's when you're going to want to consult with a laryngologist or someone like that. It's really important to think of it that way. So, like I like to use this as a comparison. Like imagine you all of a sudden woke up and you couldn't see. You're just blind, right? Like, and you're like, oh, if I just close my eyes and rest my eyes, they'll eventually like the sight will come back. This is I know it's not exactly the same kind of thing because our vision is really, really important. But having complete loss of your voice, that's a sign that there's something that's really up, and we're talking about not being able to phonate and lots of pain. You're going to want to get someone to check that out actually internally. So at that point, like a voice teacher isn't necessarily going to be as helpful. A voice teacher might be helpful on the other side, which is recovery from something like a damage like that. So a laryngologist will often use a laryngoscope. They'll use something called I think it's called a stroboscopy, where they actually take like a like a slow motion pictures of your vocal folds working to analyze what's happening, to see if there's anything that's in the way that's sort of starting to block things, like a little polyp, which is like little callus or a little growth. Um, so when those things exist, you can't really train them out. You actually do surgery is sometimes the most advised thing. Again, I'm not a healthcare professional. That's out of my hands, but that's something that you would definitely want to consult a laryngologist with. And to see, you have to actually look to see those kinds of things. So again, that's complete voice loss. Um, Another one that I think is really important to pay attention to is loss of head voice. So a great sort of way to check this out is, can you do a gentle siren up into your head voice? Um, Loss of head voice can be a sign that there's something going on too, especially if you've sung with head voice before and it's slowly going away. And there are these kinds of patterns you want to pay attention to. If you're taking longer and longer to recover after performances, that can be a sign that there's something going on here, and that you want to get looked at, and not just go through periods of vocal rest, because that actually may not be helpful. And again, it's detracting from your career and your ability to perform. So a simple exercise, right, is doing one of these sirens, going from an ah to an e, and going like ah, and you want it to be really smooth like that, right? Again, we're talking about like people who've already used their head voice before. If you're just learning how to use it, sometimes it takes a little bit of work to get the right kind of coordination and to understand how to access it. That's a different thing. So I don't want people coming back from this and being freaking out like, I've never been able to use my head voice. It's a little bit different. Again, it's if you all of a sudden, you have that loss of a part of your voice, or a big break between your chest voice and your head voice, like uh that kind of a thing. Obviously it's a sign there's something that's possibly getting in the way of your vocal folds. And that comes again from repeated smacking, lots of pressure, overuse and abuse and misuse, where we're trying to support our sound from here. We bruise the vocal folds and the tissue there. So um, again, these sort of points are check-ins, right? So if I'm like, I should be able to do that at a relatively low and relaxed volume without too much squeezing. If you're right, that's a lot of engagement that's happening with our throat muscles. We need to be thinking more about our support and relaxation of our tongue. So again, I do lots of things, right, where I'm checking for tongue mobility and release of the jaw and the throat. I do these humming exercises and try to move my head around, like yeah, yeah, yeah. We should have mobility here. A lot of these issues happen when our larynx gets really tight, it locks up, or it locks down, or we're squeezing with our shoulder muscles. This is why the stretching stuff is so important, right? It can kind of creep up on you, and then you're fatiguing your voice a little more, a little faster. So again, sometimes if you have like extreme sudden voice loss, and you're having trouble accessing head voice, it's starting to disappear, and your performance by performance, you're taking longer and longer to recover. You might need actually like a solution from a healthcare professional, like a laryngologist. So check out Center for Vocal Health, the website. I think it's some really, really great resources. It's they also have the same principle that you want to treat vocal professionals as athletes. And sometimes we have performance related injuries and they have to be treated as such. So oftentimes also just some extra facts to talk about. It takes like 1 to 3 weeks of recovery after an injury and surgery. Um, let me read some of these things. Yeah, Sarah, we're going to talk about some of the things about hydration and such in a second too, about your regular maintenance. And yes, T. So engaging the diaphragm. It's funny, we talk about the diaphragm. It's involved in our singing as we take our breath. Our diaphragm lowers and gets flat. But ultimately, we don't really have as much control over the diaphragm as we do our lower abdominal muscles. So this is right below our belly button, belly and back. These muscles are actually better for creating our support and our pressure. And so that's what I would focus on. And you can do SOVT style exercises. We have tons of information on the website and on all of these sort of episodes and classes about engaging your lower belly, doing like hissing exercises, right? Like, and I'm trying to, again, not do this with my face, but with my lower abdominal muscles, pushing down and out. And they help us build that pressure. And that keeps our diaphragm flat for longer. And we're able to control that pressure better. If we cave in, and like these muscles here, if we push in, our diaphragm comes up really quickly and the air all escapes. And so then we're more likely to try and squeeze and control that air, that kind of stuff. And that's when we're more likely to injure or fatigue our voice. So sometimes people like to use like a straw, right? Exhaling or singing through a straw helps us gain connection to our support mechanism. All of our consonants are great ways to do that. So I recommend checking out some of our content on how to support your sound better and what support is. And there's tons and tons of exercises for that. In general, a lot of our issues come from not supporting our sound appropriately. And support doesn't necessarily mean a louder sound. It certainly does contribute to that. But it's support is just about how we maintain our open space so that these muscles don't start to squeeze and contract. So when we're supporting our sound, we're able to create more freedom and release here, and we're able to use more resonance to increase the volume of our sound. So that's really the trick, right? It's more about resonance than it is about squeezing and pressing or striking our chords. So if you're doing a lot of glottal attacks, a lot of coughing, these are all things that are going to fatigue the voice. Now, someone mentioned earlier about fires, and also I'm going to lump into things like I'm going to lump this in with things like allergies and acid reflux, things that are irritants on our throat, on our vocal folds. These all contribute to swelling, and so what it does is it makes it more likely that you're going to have already like inflammation in your voice. And so when you're singing, it's more likely that you can potentially have damage to your voice. So managing your allergies, managing your acid reflux, trying to get to a place where you have an air humidifier or some purifier, especially in these fire situations. I remember also in California, I was like trying to cover up all my windows and have an air purifier because it really does affect your throat. And singing with an irritated throat begets more irritation. So again, this is this vicious cycle that can happen as our cords start to get bruised and a little swollen. They're less responsive, and so we tend to push harder, and it becomes a vicious cycle. So you really want to watch for that. If you're starting to push and strain and you're feeling pain, then it means that it's time to stop. It's time to take care of the voice. And of course, if you're feeling consistent pain, then you go down this process of consulting with a laryngologist. You might have to start with an ENT and then a laryngologist, but that's getting you straight to someone who really understands vocal professionals and is very sensitive about that kind of care, because obviously lost time, lost income, and this becomes this really hard pressure. If your voice is struggling on tour or something like that, you're going to need some help on how to do damage control, figure out what if it's necessary to cancel things and what that means, because again, if you have injury, it's going to take you a lot longer to recover on the other side. And we want to be careful, and we want to support our vocal artists who are doing all these wonderful things for us. And again, we get more and more gigs and more professional. That's when often we run into these kinds of issues, and we don't want to pressure our artists to the point where we lose our artists, our favorite performers. So a big plug on that, right, is to treat people like athletes. We can get injuries. So again, managing your acid reflux, managing allergies, anything that causes swelling to begin with is going to beget more swelling as you try to sing on it. Also illness, right? If you're sick, you want to be careful about that. Sometimes when we have head colds and things like that, we can actually still sing. The sensation might be weird, right? Because we sort of like in a bathtub kind of a feeling. Sometimes some of my students actually have a better sense of resonance and start to be more delicate with their voice. But in general, if you're having lots of irritation and coughing in your throat, it's a time to lay off the voice, decompress, because you're going to train that muscle memory of strain and force, right? Trying to get your voice back to where it was. Instead, wait, be patient, and then slowly bring your voice back into place with this sort of concept that I always do with my students again is stretch, breathe, gentle humming, vowel work, alignment and resonance in your low range is a great way to gain some idea of what's happening, the sensation, right? When we're singing or performing and doing all these things, we sometimes it's like sensory integration issues. We sometimes have trouble actually feeling what's happening until way later, like hours later, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh my gosh, I've injured myself, and it's really, really fatigued and the throat's kind of closing up. So I always like to take a moment and check in a low range and just take note of what the sensations are. What does it feel like, And then if I do it a few times in a row, does it open and start to relax and clear, or is it getting harder and harder? That's a really safe way to start. I don't like to just take people willy-nilly up into their range and then wait for something to kind of go splat a little bit. I think that's potentially a little problematic, actually, especially if someone's already in a cycle of vocal fatigue, misuse and overuse or abuse. Um, so then let's talk a little bit about also hydration, right? That was another question that came up. Um, Lining of the throat, these kinds of things. So there's this there's this problem that happens if you try to chug water last minute. I think that's really important, and I've seen it so many times. Water takes some time to get through your system and actually hydrate your vocal cords and that area of your throat. If you think about it, right, your esophagus, drinking warm tea, any of these things, it goes down the other tube, right? We don't want it to go down our windpipe. We would start coughing. We choke on that. So sometimes that, the warmth of that is nice and everything, but we're not directly hydrating. It takes some time. And so if you're just chugging water right before you go on, it's actually sometimes going to backfire on you and you're stripping the moisture out of your mouth and this sort of top area, the oropharynx. And that's, it's going to make you feel like you have that sort of dry, sticky mouth. And that's actually going to, sometimes that really, really freaks people out and you're going to feel like extra dry from chugging lots of water last minute. So just like what Sarah recommended, I'm not going to go through specific treatments, but there are lots of things like that are just going to help to kind of hydrate in a slightly more natural way. Like I know anecdotally, like Pavarotti would hide little slices of apples all over the place because pectin, things that are a little more at your natural body pH, are going to keep the moisture there and coat it in a nice sort of gentle way. Again, explore and experiment with things, but don't try to do something last minute right before you perform if you're not used to it and you don't know what it's going to be like. With any sort of medication that helps to soothe or relax your throat. But bananas, fruits, things like that can be really helpful. Oils. So I had a choir teacher who would, if we had a trip out somewhere where we're in high altitude, doing things like that, having a little bit of like peanut butter or something that can oil and lubricate your mouth can actually be helpful as well as a sensation. But again, it's a lot of this is just sort of sensation sort of stuff, right? Hydration happens way in advance, and this is part of that abuse category, right? Is don't sing on a dehydrated throat if you can help it, and try to drink water well in advance. Yeah, no, actually, totally. So throat singing and chanting, yeah, no, totally. I mean, I kind of start with this a little, not really throat singing. That's sort of an extended technique, and I use that more for like rock and grit singing and stuff. But this sort of chanting and working through vowels and resonance in a lower register is a really great way to start sort of stretching and feeling out your voice. And so I'm a big proponent of that as well. Yeah. So let's think about this. What else can we talk about? Does anyone have any questions so far? It's a lot of material that we've been covering. Yeah. Anyone have any other things that you've noticed or that you're um, you're struggling with or have any questions about. Again, sort of there's this idea that like vocal rest is going to help. It does in some ways. You want to make sure that you take breaks. That's part of that overuse category. But if you're experiencing a lot of pain and sudden voice loss, vocal rest isn't necessarily going to be helpful, and you want to consult a healthcare professional every day before you sing. Yes, this is what I talk about. Like, what does it mean to do vocal exercises? There's sort of two categories for me. There's stretching, decompressing, and working with my coordination, just trying to see if certain muscles are trying to engage when they shouldn't, like tongue tension, right? If you're feeling a lot of hardness down here, your tongue is either pushing forward really hard or pulling back in that L sound, like, oh, sometimes classical singers would try to artificially lower and hold their larynx down. Those kinds of things are going to lead to issues. So I actually work with that first, right? Like stretching, trying to release tension, getting flexibility, and then try to work on conditioning exercises. So if you think about it, do you stretch before you do a workout? You probably should, right? If you're lifting weights or you're going climbing or whatever it is, like, yes, you certainly should try to stretch out before. That's going to be better vocal health. Same thing with the voice, right? Yeah, it's going to be better health when we're doing things to get tongue mobility gently. You can manually kind of move this area a little bit, again, not while you're singing, but feeling that flexibility. And then doing stuff internally like this, right? Where we're like, yeah, 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 wah, wah, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm trying to listen for resonance. Here's another thing also as a guide. If you're having trouble accessing resonance in your sound, it's often a sign that things are too tight and potentially swollen, and maybe even swollen in your vocal folds as well, if it's repeated and you're noting it over time. So I always listening for resonance as a guide to vocal health as well. Um, and yes, honey is a really great way to soothe your throat. If you're having lots of coughing and stuff like that, absolutely. That's kind of falls in that category of like apples, honey, things that help to sort of soothe and coat. That's really, really helpful. Ear protection. I'm glad you mentioned this. It's actually, I was kind of going back and forth. Should I talk about this a little bit? Your ear, to me, is part of your vocal mechanism. If you're a vocal artist, you need to have proper ear health. So there's some things to talk about with this. Uh, your ear, so throughout the day, like we experience lots of loud sounds. Like I do recommend, it's kind of like with your eyes, like if you're experiencing really bright light staring in the sun, you're gonna want to plug your ears a little bit. Like when I hear sirens coming by and stuff like that, I try to protect against these high decibel level sounds. If you're going to loud concerts, if you're a performer with a band that is really loud, you might need some of these professional decibel reducing earplugs, because if you're experiencing ringing in your ear, that tinnitus thing, that's a sign that you've actually caused a little bit of damage, and the ear doesn't recover as well as other things when we're talking about that sort of damage. The voice can actually recover better, I would say, in some ways. So you want to be really, really conscientious about ear safety and health. I think it's really, really essential. Um, okay. Yeah. So high note causing me to cough. Yes. So the question is, what's happening with the tongue? What's happening with is your head and your neck coming out? Anything that's starting to squeeze on the vocal folds, right? If you think about it, like the vocal folds, like a spinning top, right? They're oscillating. When things get in the way, it causes that pinch and irritation. That can be one cause. Again, sometimes I have to listen to a person to really get a sense, and then also like if these things are reoccurring, then I'm not the professional for it. I would consult a laryngologist. So there's sort of this pecking order a little bit. And then again, when people have recovery from things, a vocal coach who's really good at this kind of stuff can help you rehabilitate your voice as well. The other thing too is if you're not supporting your sound the right way, sometimes we're trying to push too much air through our sound, and that can be really irritating. So kind of what like the way I would talk about it is, uh, I was just talking about this with one of my students earlier today. Support is resistance of air. So the higher we go, we're actually releasing less air. We're creating more pressure. So sometimes people get this flipped around and they're trying to actually push air out while they're singing higher. And that's going to be really irritating on the cords. It sort of dries them out and that causes the cough. You also might want to think about gently sort of massaging this area a little bit. If you've got that cough reflex is really triggered, um, it's just going to trigger again the second any of these muscles like your shoulder try to pull up. Um, yes. Okay. How do I control the sound and breath? So some of these things, again, I need to see a person in person or through a Zoom class to really get a sense and listen to the sound. But it's all from our belly and our back, really. The support and pressure control should be from down here and less from up here. That's a big part of being a good vocal coach and teaching appropriate technique. These muscles are not good at controlling the pressure, and they cause all of the tension and potential fatigue and damage. So we really want to make sure that we're doing SOVT style exercises, right? We're doing things like working on our consonant stuff. So Z's can be a great way to feel that connection, going like zzz, trying to keep our head and our neck and our face really relaxed and really still. So again, when people go up, you'll notice this habit, right? If people aren't supporting from their belly and their back, they'll go zzz, and you'll physically start to lift and squeeze a little bit. And you want to start to work that away and start low in your register, train that coordination, and then all of a sudden higher notes are going to start to be available once the body's coordinated in the right way. We're all strong enough, unless you're like a young kid, we're all pretty strong or very, very old or ill, these kinds of things. But generally, an average adult has plenty of strength and ability to create pressure. We just can't coordinate it appropriately. And so I think of it like a car engine. Of certain things get in the way of the machine moving appropriately, it sort of backs up, and then all this pressure can move into the wrong place, and we can we start squeezing certain muscles, and that's the issue. So the higher you're singing, the more intense you're singing. If you do it incorrectly, and you're really trying to muscle it and force it out, you're more likely to hurt yourself. And yeah, exactly. So that's really the whole point of being like a voice teacher and working with people, is to try and rework that coordination. And again, you could be a really, really great professional singer and sound really, really nice, but the way that you're using your voice, and this is a little bit on the misuse side of things, is making it so that you can't sing for very long. And that's going to put a wrench in your career, right? Because as you start to get more and more things, you're not going to be able to keep up with that. You're not going to have the endurance like an athlete, right? This is this sort of game. Okay. Yeah. Good. I love all these questions. Yes, definitely peace, love, relaxation. Watch for that kind of thing and try to see if you can slowly and gently work with your belly and your back and try to get your support there. Check out some of our material on support and working with tension, because it can be a vicious cycle, right? If your muscles are used to squeezing, it takes a while to slowly kind of separate them out and put that energy into our belly and our back. So it's a consistent routine. You have to be patient with it because you're changing your muscle memory and some of your habits. So that's that. So yeah, also hitting low notes. Sometimes people can develop some vocal fatigue from trying to press low, just like what we talked about when people try to sing high, we tend to lift. And when we sing low, we tend to try and press. And if you press low enough, you're going to lock your throat. And that's also that sort of static, rigid thing that I was talking about. When the larynx gets really rigid, we're more likely to hurt ourselves. And so you want to think about, when you're thinking about singing low notes, we actually have some material on this as well on the website, I believe. When you're thinking about singing low notes, you actually want to think about using higher overtones in your sound and a brightness in the vowel shape. Whereas, when we think about singing higher, we think about stretch and getting a little more of that sort of space. We can actually think of a slightly brighter sound to help us get our low pitches. And it's sort of to keep balance. So it's if you're doing a lot of that kind of thing, you're going to want to do, like, instead of an you might be pulling down that way. You're going to want to try to modify that vowel to an That's gonna kind of tighten it sometimes if that's what you're doing. Again, a lot of this is about bringing the voice into balance. So I have to like, there's general trends, but I have to listen to someone to really see what's happening. And sometimes this advice can be the opposite depending on how your coordination is working. We can fall out of balance, pushing too far forward, pushing too far back, holding things in place. And what we want is that flexibility. We want everything to be able to move and to vibrate without getting rigid or stuck in place. And the key again is lower belly and back support a lot of the time. The other thing, to mention about low notes is sometimes when we're amped up and we're using a lot of support. Um, oh yes, you're very welcome. Sometimes when we're about to um, when we're working really hard with our support and we're trying to hit high notes, our body's in this super active state, and low pitches require relaxed support. We're letting out more air. When we sing high pitches, we're supporting and we're pressurizing more, and that means we're letting out less air. So sometimes what happens is when I find people having trouble hitting low notes, and I'm someone included in this, especially as a tenor, because I'm up in the stratosphere. And sometimes this is a great way to actually check like what's happening with my technique. Um, am I sinking too much? Have I, too warmed up? You'll your voice and the muscles and everything, you're gonna get a little too tight and you can't relax down into those lower notes. So sometimes you gotta take a break, take a nap, try to work on things throughout the day. Um, and then you actually want to think about letting your breath support go, using more of a breathy exercise. So like trying to fog the mirror. So when we're supporting, we're pushing out, but that doesn't mean that our body can't come in sometimes when we're singing. It's just the nature of like we don't want to let all of our air out because then once we're completely deflated, we have no gas to sing on, and then we start squeezing, trying to hold on to the last bit of air. But a natural phrase is going to go up and down, so our body adds pressure and then relaxes and then adds pressure, and we're sort of riding the wave of our exhale. So again, when I show this with like a breath exercise, it might look like this, like a phrase. I'm pushing in and relaxing and pushing in or pushing out. So it'll be like, it's hard to come on and off of the support. Even just trying that, and you can see that's just a hard thing to coordinate. So I think that might be helpful also. So sometimes it's a support thing. Sometimes it's because of uh, your shape of your vowel and the tension that you're holding, locking your larynx in place so that it can't vibrate in a relaxed and slow way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, totally. And vibrato is also a sign, right? If you can't access your vibrato, that's sometimes a sign that there's a little extra tension here. That's why I always say like learning how to open up and use your vibrato as well as your head voice are really important for vocal health to be able to do that. Um, Yes, I do. I do one-on-one coaching, absolutely. So yeah, again, this sometimes these specific issues, like you have to see the person. Sometimes you have to look at it, right, and go to see someone who is like a laryngologist who has a stroboscopy or a laryngoscope to look at actually what's on the vocal folds and how they're vibrating and coming together. But yeah, that's a lot of these tensions, right? That's sort of the whole point of having a voice teacher is to try and work those out so that you can sing for longer with more ease. It's not like um, there's one way to do things. It's like I always say, technique is freeing and it helps you do the thing that you want to do. Right? That's appropriate technique. So that this has come over thousands of years of people working with their voice and singing, and now we have some science to back it up. It's really great that we can actually see what's going on inside the throat and someone's vocal folds. um, and yeah, you want to pay attention to this, right? Like what's happening when your voice is tight? What does it feel like? um, yeah, some days it's going to feel better than others, and those are the days that it's better to practice and save that feeling. And then the days where you're feeling a lot of tension, maybe try to do some of these other things. Like, is it because of your speech habit? Are you doing enough stretch work? I know some people use, speaking of hydration things, like a lot of people will use these, um, what do you call them, nebulizers. And there's actually a whole line of these products out there, which this is the way that you can actually get hydration to your cords right away is with steam, right? Because you're breathing it in. So, there's a reason why people like to sing in the shower. Part of it's the echo and the sound of it, but also the steam and that relaxation, it helps to hydrate the cords. Um, is it possible to speak without head voice? I'm sorry, I need the uh oh, to speak in that range. I mean, that's kind of a hard thing, right? I sometimes, as you can tell, I can sometimes pop up into my head voice when I'm talking and I get more excited. I go up into that kind of sort of spot for a sec. Um, but that's sort of a hard question for me. There's the classic voice teacher who's like, "Hi, I'm a voice teacher and I'm talking from this appropriate mix place where I'm never fatiguing my voice." Um, one way of thinking about it, right? And I can't get super deep into this. We're just out of time, really. Uh, but our head voice and chest voice are a little bit of a metaphor. And so thinking about that lighter side of the voice and having a little more space in the sound, that's going to get you a little more of that head voice, those higher partials and the resonance. So I would think of it more like a mix, perhaps, rather than thinking of like speaking in head voice. You certainly can. Uh, I don't think there's any harm in that. In fact, head voice in some ways can be a very light way of talking if your chest voice is feeling really, really sore. But yeah, I don't know. Again, it's where your natural speaking voice is comfortable is usually going to be more in a chest voice. So I think of it more like when I raise my voice, sometimes I go into that place. Like instead of shouting out, when like if you're calling and you're like doing a cheer, instead of being like, yeah, that's going to hurt your voice. You can be like, woohoo, and then I'll actually go up into a head voicey kind of place. And that's going to be a little lighter on my general coordination. So if you're a sports fan, I don't see any harm with a nice high kind of supported head voice sound rather than trying to really scream into it. Um, yeah. Okay. We're gonna, the mix thing, I would love to talk about more, but I think that's gonna have to be a whole separate topic because there's just a lot. But yes, I think as to kind of relate this to vocal health stuff, a lot of the times people um, have vocal health issues when they're trying to belt and they're trying to use too much chest voice in their belt. And we always talk about belt being a mixed technique. So there's definitely ways that you can try to incorporate more of that space when you're belting, and you're going to get a healthier belt and be able to use it for longer. So that's a great example of this triangle of vocal fatigue thing, right? Having an appropriate mix sound is going to allow you to use your voice for longer. You're less likely to get into this cycle of abuse and trying to push out a sound when you feel like you have to, and it's already feeling tight and squeezed. So I'm always like slow and steady wins the race with this kind of stuff. If you're squeezing out a song, drop it into a lower key. Find a place where you can do it with appropriate coordination. I call it weight training the sound. Do it in a lower key until you get the right habits and technique and you feel there's a little bit of ring. You can access vibrato if you want to, right? That space is available for you. You're feeling your belly and your back engage. Your head and your neck isn't coming out, straining or locking this way. Uh, that's a sign that you have an appropriate range for where your skill level is, where your range sits naturally, right? Sometimes it has nothing to do with that. It's just where your voice sits. And then try to gently move it up and down a little bit to see if you can add a little extra weight, right? So a lot of the issue that happens with the voice is it's kind of hard to tell when you're using it too hard, right? There are so many songs in our popular culture that are straight to like a really intense kind of high level. And if you just try to jump right into that, like you're often going to hurt yourself. You're putting on the 100-pound weights before you even learned how to use the right kind of musculature, right? So no one wants you to go into a headstand in yoga until you have the right core strength and you want to figure out how to put your hands in the right place. Otherwise, you might hurt your neck, right? And it's very similar with singing, actually. So that's always my way is to check those things first, to have a practice where I'm regularly stretching and opening up the throat in a lower register, testing it out before I just try to condition my voice and make it stronger and stronger. Because without the stretching, you're likely to hurt yourself a little bit. Um, yeah, mixed voice is where a lot of people tend to get a little bit of tension. So this sounds like this is a topic that we really should go over soon. I'll keep that in my list of topics to discuss. I think mixed voices tends to be a really confusing aspect of singing and what that means, and it's kind of more advanced in a lot of ways, right? That's what we're all going for, is an appropriate mix so that it all is smoothly connected, right? So again, like I'll do that like an extended yeah, right? What's one more question? Okay, and then I've got to run. But I love all of these, and I'll definitely try to save some more time next time so that we can respond. Yeah, I can respond to more of these. Um, Shoot away, and then we'll call it after this last question. Until you once as you're typing it out, I'll keep talking about this. Right when we go that's squeezing versus a lot of it is keeping this vocal tract area open. And so when our head and our neck comes up, we're squeezing that and we're pinching it off, and we don't get all the resonance. So then we're more likely to push and to squeeze more. So head voice has to be more from this. We have to have more of those higher partials and that space open. And so if we go like this, we're going to get really, really tight. So, and last thing I'll say about the mixed voice thing is the tongue and tongue tension is where you're going to want to start. So that's the idea. Is I find that the tongue is the gatekeeper between our registers. And so it's right around this sort of spot here that if our tongue gets really tired and or starts to get really tight and lock into place, it's going to cause us to crack, right? And kind of a drastic sort of jump from one sort of register to the other. And then if it's really, really tight, it blocks everything altogether. So you're going to want to focus on that loose tongue, keeping the tip by your teeth here. You can feel under here if it's locking in place a lot. So I do a lot of these like yeah, 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 that kind of exercise to try and make sure that I have tongue mobility. Um, ah, yeah. Um, okay, last question. This is an interesting one. Sing better and resonate better when I'm singing with a mic. Um, yeah, I mean, amplification, that's sort of the idea, right? When you have a mic, it's helping you with the amplification. So you're less likely to try and push out the sound to make it be louder. So that's kind of like that concept of like using resonance and what that means when resonance is our natural way of amplifying our sound rather than trying to squeeze or push too much. And then, yes, I am a big proponent of singing with other people. Actually, the process of even singing with a teacher, singing in a choir, it's all in the airspace, right? So if we're contributing to a collective sound, it does make it a little easier to do. And locking into resonance with other people helps you perceive all of that too, right? If you have someone singing in a higher or lower place, it actually helps you feel where the resonance is, and you're going to create amplification of resonance by locking into certain chords and harmony. And so many hands make light labor. It's kind of the idea with singing in a choir. Although on some other sides, if you have a choir that's doing a lot of aggressive singing or shouting or not listening to each other, then you might actually end up finding that you're straining to be heard with your choir and you're losing sensation of your own voice. So I'll put one plug, which is when you're singing with lots of people, do your own warm-ups ahead of time so you can check in with your voice. And then you can focus on actually just listening and blending. And there's just this amazing thing with music in general. When you just get things just right in the right place with the right amount of energy, it amplifies. And so there's a precision to it. And that's sort of the wonderful magic of it, is once you find the right balance of forces of resonance and support and locking into a chord with people, it kind of helps to grow the sound and it will amplify. But it's not through pressing harder. It's actually by finding the right and appropriate balance. So I don't think it's completely in your head. I also noticed that feeling. So really, really great. I think we're at our time now. And again, keep asking questions about this. Vocal health is primary. It's so important to discuss and to talk about. to have a better understanding of what's happening. And I think sometimes we can get really scared or nervous about like what's going to hurt my voice and what isn't. And it's always again about paying attention to how it feels, right? It should never hurt. And if it's feeling a little tired and it's hurting, you got to take a break and condition it another time, just like being an athlete, right? So really, I think that's the main concept: is treat your voice, treat other singers like athletes of small muscles, and stretch and condition. Thank you very much. Yeah. All right. I will see you all next week. Take care.